Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us this afternoon at the Investment Accelerator Precision Medicine Competition Briefing event. My name is Cynthia Bullock. I'm one of the Senior Innovation Leads, and I look after the enabling programs at the Aging Society Health and Nutrition sector within Innovate UK. And I have a number of colleagues with me, and the intention is that we will tell you a little bit about the program, about Innovate UK for those who don't know, about the competition itself, and then go through the application process. Melissa? Right. Great. Just before I start, some housekeeping. So on hearing the constant sounding of the alarm, do not panic. That's good, isn't it? Collect personal belongings, use lifts or run. It's not helping. All persons must evacuate the building immediately, exit through the nearest escape route. There are 2 fire exits through the front door entrance on the ground floor or via the fire exit on the lower ground floor by the cafe, making your way up to the stairs to ground floor level. Assembly point is through Cavendish Mews North to the left of the Harlem, on the opposite side of Harlem Street, past the entrance to Pure Gym. Fire bell tests are carried out every Friday between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m., and we're not expecting any today. Toilets, the ladies are lower ground floor, and the 4th floor, and the gents are lower ground and the 3rd floor, and there's a disabled toilet on the lower ground floor. Damn. Sorry for those online. Yes, so let's get going. The great news is that quite a few of our investors are in the room, so we should be able to have a really good panel discussion later. So as I mentioned, my name is Cynthia Bullock. I will run through the welcome and the aim of the day, and then my colleague Karen Spink will go through the scope of the competition. We've got our portfolio managers to go through the application process, and then we'll hear from, unfortunately, just one of the companies, Matthew Crowe from Momentum Biosciences. Unfortunately, Clive McCarthy couldn't make it and sent his apologies. But you'll be able to hear from a real-life company that's gone through an investment accelerator. And then we'll have the panel discussions with Matthew and our investors, chaired by another colleague, Neil Morgan, then closing remarks and the networking. And the networking, we specifically put it on the agenda because we feel that it's really important. This is your chance to get to talk to some of us and some of the investors and others to try and understand whether this particular program fits with your business. So Innovate UK, we're the UK's innovation agency. Our vision is to accelerate UK economy, and we do that through business-led innovation. And we have a number of different mechanisms that support that aim. A key one is working through our connecting partner, the KTN, the Knowledge Transfer Network, who are helping us to organize today's event. But we also have infrastructure such as the catapults, and the specific one that is relevant in the health space is the cell and gene therapy catapult up at Guy's Tower and the medicines discovery catapult at the at Audley Edge. So for those who are familiar with Innovate UK's grants, our CR&D grants, from our perspective, we feel that it really fits in that sort of building new value chain aspect of what we do, and we do that through a number of different mechanisms. Recently, increasingly, this is through the challenge programs called Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. Happy to talk to you more about that if you're interested. But also we have a responsive program called Open soon to be rebranded SMART, which some of you will also recognize. And these are largely opportunistic investments. But I think on the back of the 2015 comprehensive spending review, there was a remit for Innovate UK to look at other ways of funding industry and to evolve our funding model. And a number of programs have arisen as a result of this. The first one is the investor partnerships, which this competition fits under. And the other one is the innovation loans program. And these we feel are much more business-centric and really there to support scale and growth. This slide is really just to emphasize the unique aspects of the Investment Accelerator. So from an Innovate UK's perspective, we're about innovative technologies and we're about de-risking those innovative technologies to make them attractive to potential partners. The only difference here is that we're bringing in those partners much earlier on in the assessment process. So from the investor's perspective, it's about having a commercial opportunity and having investable people. And you really do need to have success in both of those elements to be able to gain the grant and the equity funding to move forward. So we ran a pilot back in 2017, and Momentum, Matthew, who you will hear from in a moment, was part of that cohort. It was really well received. At that pilot, we went out to investor partners, and those 7 were interested in working with us on that pilot, and it was fairly new ground, and we were excited about the response that we had, and consequently the results were that we had 42 heads of terms reached from the 101 or so quality pool. So these were projects that were above the quality threshold, but also then needed to get the heads of terms signed with their selected investor. 80% of these have converted into investment contracts. 60% of the companies have never received prior Innovate UK funding, which is great from our perspective because it meant that we were reaching a community or a group that we hadn't typically addressed in the past. 50% of those companies are new deal flow for the investor partners. So again, the key here is to have a win-win situation so that from an Innovate UK, we're still funding those innovative technologies and we're still de-risking, and obviously for the investor partners is the potential new deal flow pathway. Coming down to specifics with regards to the Precision Medicine Investment Accelerator, the aim was to co-fund private investment in exciting companies with exciting ideas, innovative ideas across the whole of the UK. Most of you would have noticed that the scope is fairly broad, but we did socialize that idea with our investor partners and made sure that this was also in their sweet spot, as Karen puts it, so that they were benefiting or saw the benefit of engaging with us in this process. So the key features of the Precision Medicine Investment Accelerator, we have a 6 million grant from Innovate UK to put towards this, and we're expecting a 50-50 match with the investor. Unlike the pilot where we went out to the market and selected a number of investor partners ourselves, we've had to run a competition this time round for those investors who were interested in partnering with us to come alongside. And we had a really great response. I think something like 48 or so investor EOI applications, and we ultimately ended up with the 13 investors that I will show you in a minute. Because of the nature of the program, we are looking at single company applications. Projects will be anything between 500K and 1.5 million. And obviously 50% of that will come from Innovate UK. Project duration is expected to be 24 months. And we are particularly interested in the industrial research, experimental development projects. And for those who are familiar with Innovate UK, it's sort of slightly closer to market, I guess, than our feasibility projects. And as I mentioned, it's business-led applications. So here is a list of the 13 investors that we're moving forward with for this particular application competition. All these details are also available on our website with further details about the specifics of the scope of the competition and key dates. So please do have a look at that yourselves, as well as a mechanism to contact all of those investors to kick off the discussions that you would obviously need to start having. And that's it. I will now invite Karen to tell you a little bit about the scope.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. So I'm Karen Spink. I'm Innovation Lead for Precision Medicine. It's great to see so many familiar faces today again. So you're going to hear from me again about a scope. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background also on Precision Medicine at Innovate UK and the kind of programs that we're interested in, and how we're evolving our funding model and the kind of opportunities that are available in this space. So precision medicine is a priority theme for Innovate UK. And how we define precision medicine, and I've just had a conversation down at coffee about the definition of precision medicine, is enabling early and accurate diagnosis to inform patient management or selection of therapy. So it's really about enabling that decision making in the clinic using technology, using innovative technology applications. So you can see precision medicine sits there within our bioeconomy areas of interest at precision medicine. And we strongly believe that in the UK we're in a unique position with all the expertise we have available, all the amazing technologies that are out there to really lead in the area of precision medicine globally. And the way we propose to do this is through investment in key areas of business-led innovation. So last year, Innovate UK turned 10 years old, and we've done some sort of looking across at the portfolio, the different areas that we've funded. And we looked at sort of precision medicine technologies, and we've broken it down here by therapeutic areas. I think this is really a reflection of sort of how mature each of these markets are for these kind of technologies. But in total, we've invested over £85 million in those 10 years. Which sounds quite healthy, but what's coming next is much, much bigger. So what we're building under the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, which Cynthia did mention in the introduction, is really sort of infrastructure, UK-wide infrastructure in precision medicine to really enable these opportunities for UK-led innovation. I'm going to talk a little bit about industrial strategy, just to give some background really to the real sort of strong activities in precision medicine and the kind of opportunities that may enable. And then I'll lead on to talk specifically about this competition in the context of all these sort of other activities. So Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is a large government initiative that was announced last year. And the whole thrust behind this is that we must become a more innovative economy, do more to commercialise our world-leading science base to drive growth across the UK. We have these amazing technologies. A lot of them are sitting in universities, and they're not getting out there to the patient. They're not fulfilling their potential commercially. So what can we do to really support these businesses and get these technologies out there to the patient that's waiting for them? So under the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, there are 4 grand challenges, and I've highlighted them on this slide. This represents from the UK government a 1.7 billion investment over the 4 years. So this is on top of our kind of business as usual competitions that Cynthia talked about earlier. You can see under ageing society in particular, there's areas there that are specifically of interest to precision medicine. And we have data to early diagnosis and precision medicine, which really stands out there. But also just consider that the AI and the data economy isn't kind of a standalone grand challenge, but that kind of oversees the whole, all of the other grand challenges. So AI and data economy is kind of considered underpinning across all the different grand challenges. So you can apply AI and data economy applied to precision medicine, for example, is a strong theme in Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And the whole kind of challenge for us is to bring diverse expertise together from across the UK to solve some of these key societal challenges through these grand challenges. And for the innovator, for those with good ideas that are going to really make a difference, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So the data to early diagnosis and precision medicine, I mentioned the 85 million, but this is a 210 million investment in itself, just within this challenge. And what we're looking at here is to build world-leading infrastructure and capabilities across the UK. And really this is to enable the creation of new products and services that will help to diagnose diseases earlier and help clinicians choose the best treatment for the individual patients. So this particular challenge we've broken down into 3 main work streams, and these are all designed to combine the wealth of data that we have available with real-world evidence and make this available to people developing these technologies to really support the development of these new technologies. So one of these strands is a whole genome project. We're sequencing 500,000 subjects in the UK biobank. So these are healthy individuals, and we have extensive health data on these individuals over time as well. So this is really, really important data. We're also, you might have seen announcements in the last couple of weeks on these digital innovation hubs, and this is driven by Health Data Research UK and NHS England. And these are individual hubs which are working together across the UK to create a network to really support the utility and enable the availability of all this data to people working in this area, to researchers, to SMEs, to companies who are developing new technologies. And the digital innovation hubs are really going to pin together all these other activities and manage the data to ensure that it's ethically managed and the data is secure and managed appropriately. Digital pathology has been most of my activities, I have to say, in the last few weeks. This competition closes this week, and some of you I know are involved in bids for this. And this is really a grain to create UK-wide infrastructure, and we have significant expertise in digital pathology, radiology in the UK, and this is really to align those activities and understand how we can actually take all this data that's sitting on slides in pathology labs and digitalise it and combine it with other data. How can we apply these AI algorithms and machine learning algorithms to some of these platforms and extract that data and make use of it and understand more about the individual patient? So these are really exciting programmes, and they involve lots of different stakeholders from the NHS, obviously from government, SMEs, large companies, academics. So it's really kind of bringing that richness of opportunity to the UK. So that is kind of a background really to what we're doing in Innovate UK in terms of precision medicine and what's coming and where we're kind of focusing. But just thinking about that in the context of this particular competition. So here what we're doing is we're looking at what kind of technologies are out there at the moment, what kind of technologies are going to disrupt the opportunities in the clinic, what are the game-changing opportunities out there. So thinking about all that in the background, we're looking to invest in opportunities to improve the way that we accurately diagnose, monitor and treat disease. So Cynthia mentioned this is simultaneous grant and venture capital investment. So it's a tremendous opportunity for SMEs who are looking to de-risk their projects, to advance their technologies, 100% funding, and to bring a VC on board as well as government grant funding is a tremendously exciting opportunity. And we're looking really to combine clinical biomarker knowledge that's out there already with advances in diagnostic technologies, data analysis, and tailor-made therapies. And I built this scope by going to talk to lots of people. So we obviously, at Innovate UK, we have our own ideas around precision medicine by going out and talking to people. And we have our own strategies. But to really understand the sweet spot with investor partners and to understand what kind of companies they have in the investor portfolio, where would that interest be and where would the overlap be? I did quite a lot of work going out and identifying there. And what I've come up with is actually quite a broad scope in precision medicine. So I'm going to go over these individually, but overall we're looking at next generation diagnostics, those disruptive technologies that enable new diagnostic capabilities in the clinic. Breakthrough point of care wearable or implantable devices. So this is really looking at what's out there at the moment, and some of the wearables coming through you wouldn't know you're wearing. They just sit on your skin, they're tattoos, they're graphene tattoos. There's lots of technologies out there that you link them with the capabilities, for example, with digital approaches, and you can really kind of maximise and really take advantage of that ability to capture data in real time. Artificial intelligence, I've already mentioned about ISCF and our interest there in understanding these technologies and how they can be applied. So we're looking for artificial intelligence applied to precision medicine. And tailor-made therapies. Traditionally, we don't include drug discovery kind of approaches, tailor-made therapies, in our precision medicine portfolio because we have an advanced therapy group separately. But within this scope, we really wanted to look at, as I said, what was of interest to investor partners as well. And this was one area where we felt that, this is definitely an important part of precision medicine. And although obviously the amount of fund available is $500,000 to $1.5 million, it's not going to fund a whole drug discovery program, but we can look at key de-risking exercises in that process and really understand them better. We'd be very interested in those kind of approaches. So next generation diagnostics. So we're looking at something that enables earlier and accurate diagnosis to inform patient management, so linking up with our definition of precision medicine. So this can include novel molecular and cellular diagnostics, advanced medtech devices, imaging, clinical pathology technologies, those kind of areas. And what we're particularly looking for is disruptive approaches, such as liquid biopsies, extracellular vesicles. We're obviously making a lot of progress in these kind of areas at the moment, and I believe strongly that we have expertise in the UK that can be world leading in these kind of diagnostic areas, and we just want to give them a push towards commercialisation. Multi-omic diagnostics, so I mentioned about the genomics that we're doing and really thinking about the other layers of omic information that's out there and how we might integrate that into a diagnostic. So we'd be very interested to hear about platforms that particularly address this. So the genomics, transcriptomics, epigenomics, metabolomics, etc., etc. So I mentioned breakthrough point of care and wearables, and that there's a lot of exciting technologies out there at the moment, and the emphasis is on gathering data for the individual patient outside of the hospital, and particularly looking for smart closed-loop medical devices that will actually dose the patient in response to the personalised biomarker monitor. So, there are some interesting technologies out there that are being developed there, and it's understanding how close these are to the market as well. And tailor-made therapies. So just some examples here: the gene therapy, regenerative cell therapy, next generation immunotherapy. What's going beyond CAR-T? What's the next therapy out there? Synthetic biology, or understanding the combination therapies that can be beneficial to the individual patient, understanding what combinations for that patient, what dosing of that particular combination. So these can include projects up to first in humans, so we're really looking for kind of proof of concept level there, and observational studies, as long as you have clearly defined de-risking objectives. So there needs to be a certain stage in the project that would advance that programme by de-risking. And finally, the artificial intelligence application, I mentioned the example with the digital pathology. How can we extract that data from all these devices that we have, all the diagnostic platforms, to digitalise them and make them available to, to understand at the individual patient level, combined with this information. I mentioned imaging systems and clinical pathology, also clinical decision platforms. So we're particularly looking for bioinformatic platforms or AI-powered applications that make it possible to process longitudinal data to inform early and accurate diagnosis, so the patient can be their own control. You can follow these biomarkers, you can follow these trends in the individual person's health over time, and really understand what an early indication of disease looks like in the individual patient. So we're kind of moving beyond the sort of more traditional applications. And so that's the main description of the scope of this competition. So we do have some areas that will be out of scope, and we're not looking to fund these areas. So just to kind of make that clearer for you. So projects that do not meet the definition of precision medicine that I described a couple of slides back. Projects that are not clearly disruptive, innovative ideas that will lead to novel solutions. We're looking for the next thing here. We're looking for the novel technologies, what's going to make a difference. Biomarker discovery, we don't want to fund early sort of biomarker discovery and understanding there, although if there's the de-risking part is understanding that biomarker in a clinical context, then that's fine if it's about clinical validation using a particular platform. Diagnostic tests for treatments that are not available or still in development, so unless that's a companion diagnostic approach. General digital health and wellness apps, we need to be focused on specific medical conditions, and we need to understand the biomarkers linked to that medical condition. So sort of general sort of, tracking heart rates and things like that, and digital health is not in scope. Drug discovery that is not a tailor-made or personalised therapy, so general drug discovery approaches, small molecules that are not tailor-made personalised therapy. And clinical trials for these tailor-made therapies beyond that proof of concept study. Okay, so that's the scope. Shall I take questions now, or? Any questions for Karen, although she will still be available? I'll be here the rest of the day, so yeah.
Just a simple question. When you define one particular area that you are looking particularly for, so if you have something that is in the general definition...
Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll introduce myself. Xavier Gollet from Gold Standard Phantoms. One of the questions I had is, like, you define particular themes or areas, and then you're asking, and then under these themes of areas, you just say what you're particularly looking for.
Yeah.
Does it mean that you're only going to fund something that you're particularly looking for, or it also really encompass the whole area that you've defined in the first place?
Yeah, the particularly for is really for inspiration. It's technologies we've gone out, we've identified. We're not saying that we understand all the amazing technologies. So we'll go by the first point, which is what needs to be in scope of those 4 main points. But the kind of we're particularly looking for is really designed just to kind of make you think, oh, okay, yeah, that's...
And that's because companies sometimes say, well, what do you think they do with the kind of things?
Yeah, exactly. So it's to give you an idea of the scope, the level of kind of innovation that we're looking for, if you like. So,
question, Oliver from Pro Capital. This is focused on precision medicine investment. Within Innovate UK, are there any other sales that would deal with other parts of medicine, please?
any other calls for...
Are there any other, this is focused purely on precision medicine. Mm-hmm. Do you have other cells or other units within Innovate UK that will look at investment in other areas of medicine, please?
Yep, so kind of discovery,
drug discoveries, issues, etc.
So yep. we do have competitions often tailored to specific scope, but with respect to the Investment Accelerator, this is the only competition we've currently got on that program. But absolutely, we are launching competitions often, and each of those will have specific scope.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's not currently a ring-fenced drug discovery, but there'd be open competitions by medical catalysts.
Yeah.
There are other programs.
Can you expand a bit more on what you mean by a tailor-made therapy? I mean, for example, if I have a patient with a specific chromosomal translocation, and I've got a treatment that will work on patients with those translocation, but there might be 100 of those patients in the UK, and patients with a different translocation have got a different therapy.
Yeah.
Is that a tailor-made therapy?
Absolutely.
Or does it have to be...
Absolutely. It's being able to look at biomarkers, stratify those patients.
So it doesn't
so
have...
it's not on the... It's understanding the individual patient's biomarkers and then tailoring the therapy for those. So it might be therapies that are already on the market, but it's understanding what therapies are tailored towards them. So.
And then you said it's not for for drugs that are not currently on the market unless it's a companion diagnostic. Does that mean it's okay to apply for a companion diagnostic for a drug that's in development?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
So
I know you put it up.
go back to that bit of the...
So you say so on there.
No, no, you go back forward rather. Sorry, I'm confusing you. Yeah.
The one you just went past it.
The
The last
outer scope.
slide.
Oh,
So
this one, yeah.
diagnostic tests for treatments that are not available or still in development unless a companion diagnostic. So does that mean a companion diagnostic that is still in development, for a drug that is still in development, is okay?
Yeah, so if you're
Yes.
developing it alongside
Yes.
the drug that's being developed, that's fine, but
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry. Cheers. Just something between Cynthia's talk and yours. Cynthia mentioned something about this particular call is for closer to market applications rather than on feasibility. While there was a lot here about the activities for de-risking the research and the development. And I just want to understand what is the sweet spot here of the level of risk that we're talking about that Innovate UK is happy to be taking, and if that is something similar to what the investors also in the room are happy to take. Because, for example, our company has two things. You know, we could approach this from something that's closer to market, or we could approach it with something that is, you know, higher risk.
Yeah.
Can you please
I
elaborate?
think what would be
on
really
that?
good if we can park that one for when we have the panel. Is that okay? Because I think having the investors involved in that discussion would be really useful.
And the level of risk appetite will be different depending on who the investors are. From an Innovate UK's perspective, we are looking for game-changing technology. We're looking for innovative technology. It needs to be novel. It needs to be exciting. It needs to not just be a me too. And so from our perspective, the assessment will be nothing that you haven't seen before if you've gone for any Innovate UK funding. Obviously, the different element will be the fact that we've got investors working alongside us, and they will be looking for different things. And you'll have to convince them that to fund you alongside our funding, obviously, alongside having met the threshold that we require. I'm just conscious that
How many questions can we take?
maybe 2 more, do you think? Okay, maybe 3 more.
Hello, Ian Miller from SAW Diagnostics. I was wondering if the competition anticipates syndicated investment by the investors and whether that had been done in the previous accelerator. And I guess what I mean by that is if you were to imagine a 1.5 million application and the privates perhaps didn't feel comfortable with a 750k contribution, do you imagine syndicates coming into existence here?
Do you want to? Sorry, the reason I'm hesitating is we're down the science side, and then and then Neil is down the investment side.
So I'm Neil Morgan. I'm managing the investor partnerships part of the competition. Yes, syndication's fine. either amongst the 13 or even outside of the 13, but one of listed, that you'll see in a minute, but one of the 13 has to lead on that investment. They have to be the legal entity that Innovate UK excuse me, deals with.
Not want to stay here just in case.
Yeah.
You, and then that's it. I'm really sorry. We just need to move on because I'm conscious that
Thank you.
the application process is slightly different.
Hi, it's Vibhor this side from Pangea Data. My question was with regards to one of the first questions which was asked around the scope of this competition. So if we are looking at an overarching scope heading, such as bioinformatics applications and AI applications, would companies who provide components in that interest, which might be part of the overall value chain around precision medicine as defined by the competition over here, would they be in scope to apply, or would they have to be part of a consortium?
No, it's individual companies for this programme. But if it's an innovation, a disruptive innovation that will enable a diagnostic platform, will enable that decision to be made in the clinic, then that will be in scope. So it's thinking about the definition of precision medicine and how it's actually contributing to that. So if that part of it is enabling that application, then yes.
Thank you.
Then, sorry to keep adding, but then you have to think about the commercial value for a potential investor. So what would they get out of investing in your company? Because obviously they can't invest in the consortia.
Yeah, it would be an individual company.
Thank you.
Graham Ball from Compandiax. So we have an AI method for analysis of data that allows us to do drug discovery. It allows us to analyze temporal data and time series data, and it allows us to develop diagnostic models. But all of that really results in the biomarker discovery. Are we in scope or are we not in scope?
Sorry, that enables biomarker discovery.
So in order to make a decision,
yeah.
the result of all of these analyses is ultimately a biomarker. So, and many of the data examples you've shown where, for example, multi-omics data has been suggested or time series data, well, the end point of those will be biomarkers by the broader definition. So is that in scope or is it not in scope?
Yeah, I'm not.
So is that because of the third point that says biomarker discovery in itself is not in
Yes.
scope? I think it's about how validated those are, to be honest. If you're looking at developing new biomarkers that aren't validated, then no, that would not be in scope.
Well, we have the beginning and the end of this in that we have developed algorithms to identify the biomarkers. We have biomarkers we've already discovered. So
And validated.
And validated.
Great, then it'll be in scope.
Okay.
Could I just say something about scope? For the benefit of time as well, if we do have a business support email and telephone number on our application form, so if you have specific scope questions, you can contact us. They'll probably go through to Karen, I expect, and then you can get, you can explain the details of your question and get a proper response as well.
Last question.
It's a really quick question. So when you say single SME, what does that really mean? So obviously, is that a prime? So we've already had conversations about partnering up, and one company, Massive Analytic, is going to be the lead. But what does it actually mean, a single SME?
Do you want to answer
that? So essentially, this works that you apply for an Innovate UK really in the grant in the standard way, and it goes through our standard assessment process. You apply as a single company because the idea of the competition is that to get your match funding, 50% in this case match funding, you get that from an investor through heads of terms and an investment contract. So if it's a consortium in the sort of collaborative R&D sense, it's very hard for an investor to invest in a consortium. So it needs to be a single SME. You can have partners, but they need to be subcontracted costs to you. So they need to be in your supply chain, if you like, of the project.
So this essentially means an investment in the company as part of the match. Is that how it works?
That's exactly what it means. Right. That is exactly how this works.
Right. So presumably any partners, that's something that the SME would have to sort out in terms of equity split, if that's the way it'll go.
Yes, that would be something you would need to discuss with your investor and their heads of terms and how that would work. If you have, that's, if you like, your share structure.
Yeah.
Which share structure, I'm sure the investors would be interested to discuss with you. We have a one-sided NDA with investors, so they discuss that sort of thing with you. They don't share it with us, so it's not something I could ever really directly comment on. But certainly share structures and partners is something that would be in your discussion with investors.
Literally just 10 more seconds. That list that you provided of the investors, is that it?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, so there aren't any other opportunities for other investors outside of that list. It has to be within that list.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, again, coming back to the syndication question, there potentially an investor could work with one of those 13 investors who would have to act as the lead investor, so it would be through syndication. But yes, we asked investors to apply to partner with us. I'll probably tell you during the panel session how we selected broadly. But yes, it has to be through one of those 13.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to invite Melissa up to tell you about how to actually apply for the competition.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melissa Hughes, and I'm a portfolio manager at Innovate UK, and I'm managing this competition. And I'm joined today by my colleague Joe, and between us we will take you through the application process, including application finances, and then assessment and project setup. So just to reiterate the eligibility criteria for this competition, so the lead must be a UK-based SME, and it is not collaborative, it's only a single applicant. You need to carry out your project in the UK and exploit the results from your project in the UK. Project costs can be between 500,000 to 1.5 million. Just to stress, that's total project costs. If we cannot be over 1.5, otherwise you will be considered ineligible. Project length is up to 24 months, and you need to be in a position to start your project by the 1st of May 2019. So those of you who have previously applied with Innovate UK and have been successful and have been awarded grant funding, so if you've applied before as the lead or a sole company and you were awarded funding but you haven't made a substantial effort to exploit the award, then we will award no more funding to you. It's just something to bear in mind when applying. So the key dates for this competition, so it's already open, it's live, it's on our Innovation Funding Service, IFS. And the submission deadline is noon on the dot on the 26th of September. That is a hard deadline, so if you experience any technical difficulties or if you need any support, please contact us in good time. Leaving it 3 minutes before the deadline, unfortunately, won't work in your favour. So the application process for this competition is slightly different from our standard competitions, which I'll run through shortly. So there are 2 sets of notification dates. So we've got 2nd of November, and that will be for applicants. So you'll all be informed whether or not you've passed the technical assessment. And then we've also got the investor heads of terms deadline, which is the 11th of January next year. And then finally, applicants will be informed of the decision on the 18th of January 2019. So just to explain the application process for this competition then. So competition is online, you apply online. For those of you that have applied before, it's a similar process. So once you have submitted your application, we'll then do our scope and eligibility checks, and at this point you'll be notified if you're in scope or if you're out of scope for being ineligible. For example, your project costs are over the limit. At this point, it then follows our normal process in the fact that your application will go to 5 independent Innovate UK assessors, alongside also being reviewed by investors. So the technical assessment and investor review are entirely independent of each other. Then once the technical assessment has been completed, we'll have our list of applications, and if you've passed the quality threshold, you'll be notified that you have, and those obviously who haven't, you will also be notified. Please bear in mind that the way the Innovation Funding Service is set up, for those of you that don't pass the quality threshold, we're not able to release your feedback until the overall competition is closed, so you won't get that feedback until January of next year, so just bear that in mind. So if those of you that have passed the technical assessment, your scores and your feedback will be shared with the investor partners, and then they have until the 23rd of November to confirm the applicants that they wish to invest in. And then investors and the applicants have until the 11th of January to reach heads of terms. And then we will, here at Innovate UK, we will review all the applications that have passed the technical assessment and reach heads of terms. And we will complete a portfolio review if necessary to ensure that all the areas of the scope have been addressed. And then we will then notify you as to whether or not your application has been successful. And you will have until the 11th of April 2019 to reach completion of an executed contract and project setup. So I'll just quickly run you through the Innovation Funding Service. So this map just shows, I don't know if you can see, we do have usage outside of the UK, but as a whole, as you would expect, most of our users are from the UK. So as I mentioned, the competition is live and you can find it on our website. So if you go on the gov.uk website, and then in the top right-hand corner there, if you click on search all funding opportunities and filter, you'll be able to see the competition. So it has everything you need online. You'll be able to see the dates. In the scope tab, there is the complete list of all 13 investors, including their contact details for you to start those initial discussions. There's also a PDF for you to download, which has the all the information on each of the investors, including a bit of background about them. And then you can also find the information to what we're sort of looking for you to include in your answers, sorry. And then supporting information. So if you've got any questions about as to whether or not your application would be in scope, all the contact details are available for you there. So when you decide to apply, so for those of you that have applied with Innovate UK before and have an account, you can just simply log in. Those of you that are new will need to register. And you can either choose to manually type your information in, or you can search yourself up on Companies House and it will auto-populate for you. So once you've got your account and you're all set up, the terms and conditions are there for you to review at any point. And then you can see along there you've got the dashboard, so you can see how much your application has been completed. So when answering the question, you have the detailed guidance available for you. That's always there for every single question. You can also choose to invite people from your organisation to help you answer your questions if you so wish. So that will all be done through the system, and they'll send them an email to invite them in, and they can help you form your response. Then you've got the word count, and you can also format your answers as well. So it is our standard application form that is split into 3 sections. So section 1, the application details, which is just the title, timescales, research category and innovation area, and as to whether or not your application is actually a resubmission. Then we've got the project summary, public description and scope. All of those areas aren't marked, but aren't scored, but give background information. Just be mindful of what you put in the public description, because that will be published if your project is successful, so please don't include any sensitive information in there. So the application questions, for those of you that are familiar, are our standard questions. There has been an additional one added on, so question 11, which I will get to. So as previously mentioned, all the guidance that you need is already on IFS, so I won't go through each question in detail because it's all there for you. And you have optional appendices for questions 2, 3, 7 and 8. Just a few points to bear in mind with appendices. Please don't squeeze the font into size 8. They need to be readable for assessors, and also please don't try and squeeze 20 pages worth of appendices in, because all assessors are advised to disregard anything over the page limit. And they're also there to support your answer, not a continuation of your answer. So question 1 is around need or challenge. So here we're looking for you to explain what is the drive and reason for you doing your project. Is your project market pull or technology push? And we want to see that there is a genuine need for your idea. So we'll be looking for you to describe the main motivation for your project, the nearest current state of the art, and any work you've already done to address the need. For example, is the project focused on maturing an existing capability or developing a new one? And then you'll need to identify the wider economic, social, environmental, cultural and/or political challenges. Question 2 relates to approach and innovation. So what are you doing in your project and how is this an improvement on what already exists? So here we'll be looking for you to explain how you propose to address the need, challenge or opportunity identified. Indicate where the focus of the innovation will be in the project. For example, is it an application of existing technologies in a new area or development of new technologies for existing areas? We're also looking for you to explain how this project fits with your current product or service lines and offerings. And then describe the nature of outputs you would expect from the project. So for question 2, you have optional appendices to submit graphs or diagrams to demonstrate the innovation of your technology. Question 3 relates to team and resources. So here we're looking for you to describe your project team. We need you to explain why why your team are the right people for the job. So assessors will be looking to see that you have the right skills, experience and access to facilities. So ultimately we need to know who's involved in the role and why you're using them. So you need to detail the roles, skills and relevant experience of all members of the project team and provide detail of any key external parties involved, for example subcontractors. We need you to explain why you're using them, and you also need to justify if you're using any subcontractors that are foreign rather than UK, and also highlight any gaps in the team that need to be filled. And question 3 also allows for an optional appendix. Question 4 relates to market awareness. So how well do you understand the market that you are or you will be operating in? So for the target market, you should describe the size of the addressable market. For the project outcomes, backed up by appropriate references where available. The structure and dynamics of the market, the main supply and value chains and business models in operation, and any barriers to entry, and the current UK position in addressing this market. So for highly innovative projects where the market may be explored, we'd be looking for you to explain what the route to market could or might be, the size of the market, and how the project will seek to explore its potential. Question 5 is outcomes and route to market. So what is the impact of your project on your business? So here we're looking for you to describe your current position in the market and the supply and value chains outlined. So for example, will you be extending or establishing your market position? We're looking for you to describe your target customers and or end users and the value proposition to them, and also describe your route to market and tell us how you're going to profit from your innovation. Question 6 is around wider impacts. So what is the project, the wider impacts of your project, outside of your project team? So here you need to identify and where possible quantify the economic benefits of your project to those outside of the project. And you also need to identify any expected social impacts, and these can be both positive or negative, and likewise with environmental impacts. Question 7 is project management. So here assessors are looking to see that you have a well thought out project plan. So you need to outline the main work packages of the project, including the relevant research category and the total cost of each one. You also need to describe your approach to project management. So are you using any project management methodology? We're also looking for you to outline the management reporting lines and make sure your project plan is sufficiently detailed to identify any links or dependencies between work packages or milestones. And again, you have an optional appendix for a project plan or a Gantt chart. Question 8 relates to risks. So what are the main risks for your project? So here you need to identify in your response any key risks and uncertainties of the project, including technical, commercial, managerial and environmental risks, and make sure you highlight the most significant ones. And you also need to explain how these risks will be mitigated. And again, you can choose to upload a risk register to support your answer. Question 9 is around additionality. So tell us the difference that public funding from Innovate UK and the private investment would make to your project, such as faster to market, more partners or reduced risk. And tell us why you're not able to wholly fund the project from your own resources. What would happen if your project was unsuccessful? Question 10 relates to cost and value for money. So assessors are looking to see that your project is reasonable and good value for money. So here you need to explain how you will finance your contributions to the project, explain how this project represents value for money for you and the taxpayer, and justify any subcontractor costs and why they are critical to the project. And finally, we have question 11, which is around investor selection. So here, you simply need to choose one investor, so you list your preferred investor, or your application will go to all. So you can't write that you have a top 2 or a top 5. You can either choose for your application to go to one of the 13 investors or all of the 13 investors. So just bear in mind that this question does have a word limit, so you can't write an additional response. So here you just need to note the name of your preferred investor, or if you want your application reviewed by all. Okay, so I will now hand over to Joe, who is going to take you through the application finances.
Okay, thank you, Melissa, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Lyford. I'm a portfolio manager at Innovate UK as well. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 things today, really. I will talk to you firstly about the funding rules that are in place for this competition. I'll then talk to you about how to actually submit an application to us. And finally, I will talk to you about what will happen should you be successful in applying for this competition. So the finance section within the Innovation Funding Service is split into 3 areas, as you can see. And each of these areas must be completed before an application can be submitted to us. The 3 areas are your project costs, your organisation, and your funding, and I'll take you through each of these now. So the first area is your project costs, and for those of you who have applied to us previously, you will recognise the eligible cost categories on the screen. So you will need to enter the detail behind any cost categories that you require to deliver your project, and the Innovation Funding Service will calculate the values for you. We're going to go through these categories very briefly, and I'll touch on what is and what is not eligible within each. However, full guidance is available to you online when working on your application. So the first cost category is labour costs. Here you can enter the details for anyone who is to work directly on your project, and the service allows you to enter their project role, their gross annual salary, and the number of days that they are to work directly on the project. It will automatically calculate a daily rate and subsequent total cost for you. Just to note here that all staff must be paid by PAYE, and you should only include non-discretionary items, and discretionary items such as dividends or performance-related pay, for example, are not eligible and should not be included. For overhead costs, you have 3 options available to you within IFS. Firstly, if you do not wish to include any overhead costs at all, then you can simply select that option and it will produce a naught value for you. You can select the 20% of labour cost option, and the service will then automatically produce a value based on your labour costs. Or finally, you have the option to calculate your own overhead costs. And the calculate overhead costs option is split into 2 different areas. We have firstly indirect overheads, which are administrative costs associated with back office functions such as HR or finance, and these costs must be both directly attributable and additional. And secondly, we have direct overhead costs, and these are the costs that really relate to those within your labour costs, so those are actually working directly on your project. IFS allows you to download and upload the calculation spreadsheet. And just to reiterate on this, I know overhead is probably the most complicated cost category that we have. So full guidance is available to you online and some examples of how to actually complete the form itself. For material costs, you can simply enter the items, values, the unit cost and the volumes for any materials that are to be used entirely on your project, and the subsequent totals will be calculated for you by the service. Just to note here that we would expect any residual values of any items to be removed when entering the cost per item so that all of your project costs are completely specific to your project. For capital usage, you can include a description of any assets that are required to deliver your project. You can state whether they are new or existing, the depreciation period to be used, which should be in line with your organization's depreciation policy. You can state the value of the asset at the beginning of the project, the residual value of it at the end, and finally the degree of utilization required of that asset to actually deliver your project. IFS will then automatically calculate the usage cost based on these details, such as in the example that you can see on the screen. For subcontract costs, you can include the cost of work which cannot reasonably be carried out within your organization. Just to note here that if the work is to be carried out abroad, as Melissa mentioned earlier, please do include an explanation as to why a UK alternative was not selected. And likewise, if the work is to be carried out by a linked entity, such as a parent company, for example, then please do state within your costs that the work will be carried out entirely at cost with no profit element incorporated within the figure that you put into the system. For travel and subsistence, you can include the costs of any journeys which are really necessary to deliver your project. Do make sure that the purpose of any journeys are clearly explained, and know that any sort of sales or marketing or exploitation activity is not eligible, so you shouldn't include that within your travel and subsistence costs. And the very last section is other costs, which is simply to be used for any items that do not fit into the previous cost categories, such as training or patent filing costs, for example. Please do ensure that across all of your cost categories that there is no double counting whatsoever, and within this section you can simply enter the items in the box provided. So once you're happy that all of your project costs have been added to the system, you will be given a final opportunity to review these before you submit it to us, and you will also need to confirm that the costs that you have included within your application are eligible as per the project cost guidance, and then when you're happy you can simply mark this section as complete and it will be saved within your application. So the next area of the finance section is your organisation, and within this section you need to enter details relating to your organisation specifically, such as its size, for example, which will then determine the level of grant that you are eligible to receive from us. If you are a newly incorporated organisation, then you can simply enter 0 values for the financial overview sections like you can see in the example on the screen. And the final area of the finance section is your funding. Now, the level of grant that you can receive from us depends on both the type of organisation that you are and also the type of research that your project represents, and IFS will actually calculate your grant value based on these 2 criteria. So this competition, as was mentioned earlier, is only applicable to small and medium-sized businesses completing either an industrial research or an experimental development-based project. So firstly, for industrial research projects, Innovate UK will fund 50% of the project costs, and obviously the investor partner will therefore fund the remaining 50%. And then for experimental development projects, Innovate UK will fund 45% of project costs for small companies and 35% of costs for medium-sized enterprises. So in the example that we have on the screen, it shows that the level of grant entitled, the maximum level of grant entitled to the applicant as 70% based on the figures that they had in place for that competition. However, just to note that you will have to reduce this grant amount if carrying out an industrial research-based project. So actually within the Innovation Funding Service, you have the power to actually go in and manually change the grant intervention rate. So please do make sure that you do that to comply with the state aid rules that we have in place for this competition. You also need to state whether you have any other public funding in place for your project, as this will obviously reduce the level of funding that you're eligible to receive from us. And it's also here where you need to agree to the terms and conditions that are in place for this competition. These were previously outlined in a conditional offer letter, which we no longer use for IFS-based competitions. So you do have the option here to click in to the terms and conditions and review them, and then you can tick the box to confirm that you're happy with them before progressing. So I mentioned about other public funding for your project. So do tell us if you have received any other public sector funding related to your project, as you do need to declare this to us. As I mentioned, it will reduce the level of grant that you're eligible to receive from us to comply with state aid rules. Before you actually submit an application to us, you are able to have a quick overview of the finance section that you've completed. This page states the funding rules for the competition, including eligible total project costs and project duration. Please do check that your figures are in line with the funding rules that we have in place, as I mentioned before. And as Melissa mentioned earlier on today, your total project costs must be within the published eligible costs that we have in place rather than the funding source. So please do not confuse the two. Do not confuse the difference between the amount of grant that you can receive and the size of your project costs. And in terms of actually submitting your application to us, the Innovation Funding Service will check that all finances are complete, and it will actually flag to you if there are anything left for you to complete before you can submit it. It won't actually validate the costs for you, so it is your responsibility as an applicant to check that all of the costs that you have entered are within the eligible total project costs as stated in the competition brief and any guidance that you've been given. You will then have the option to review any aspect of your application before you submit it to us to make sure that you are happy with everything. And we do recommend that you leave plenty of time in which to finalise your application, as deadlines are completely absolute and there are no exceptions to that rule. We do see a lot of applicants who complete the application and get to 100% completed within the Innovation Funding Service, but they don't actually complete the final step of it, submitting it to us. So please do make sure that you press the button. I know it's very simple, but I have seen in a recent competition a couple of applications that got to 100% and they'd done everything, but they hadn't actually pressed the button to submit it to us. And then a few months down the line, they got in touch to say, you know, what was the outcome of our application? And unfortunately, we hadn't done anything with it, because as far as we were concerned, it was never submitted. So do make sure that you press the button and submit it to us. This next slide, I appreciate you might not be able to see this slide too easily from where you are. Essentially, this table shows for a previous competition the number of applicants submitting their proposals each hour leading up to the noon deadline that we had in place. So as you can see, the vast majority of applicants do tend to leave it into the final hours in which to submit it to us. We strongly recommend, as we mentioned a few times today, that you do perhaps submit it a little bit earlier than that, in good time to avoid any last-minute technical issues. I had a competition that closed a couple of weeks ago, and we had quite a few people trying to contact us in the afternoon to say that they tried to submit it in the last few minutes leading up to the deadline. Unfortunately, we can't really do much about that, so we do ask that you leave plenty of time to submit before the noon deadline. Once you have actually submitted it to us, you will be taken to this confirmation page, which also outlines the next steps in the process. So obviously, once you get to 100% complete and you submit it, as long as you've got this view, you'll know that we've received it, and we will therefore take it forward. And you can then return to your dashboard page within the Innovation Funding Service, which shows you the status of any applications that you have indeed submitted to us or started for another competition potentially. Okay, Okay, moving on very briefly to the assessment process that we have in place for this competition. So all applications that we receive will be assessed by a pool of assessors from both an industrial and an academic background. A few tips in terms of what assessors are looking for. So they are looking for clear and concise responses throughout, and they want the right amount of information per question. So they don't want to be completely overloaded and bombarded with detail, but at the same time, they don't want to have to make guesses and assumptions as to what you're trying to do in your project or what you're trying to say within your application. So it's about trying to find the right balance between those two. All answers must be quantified and justified, and a viable opportunity for growth that necessitates public funding must be clearly present throughout your application. And once all of the applications have actually been submitted and assessed and scored, feedback will be made available to you within the Innovation Funding Service, which provides a bit of explanation as to why you've been given certain scores for certain questions, and you'll be notified when this is available for you to view. Successful applicants will then go through to the project setup process within the Innovation Funding Service, which looks a little bit like this, with all of the required setup milestones listed as headings. So you as applicants therefore have good visibility of what you need to complete and also what we need to complete internally before an application, before project can be started, which should hopefully speed up the process of getting projects off the ground. Each of these headings must show as complete before we issue you with a grant offer letter, which is when you can actually go and begin your project. You can start the project setup process as soon as you have been notified through our IFS that you are successful, and projects should start within 90 days of being notified that you are successful. And finally, once a project has started, it's important to know that grant is always paid quarterly in arrears, and you can only claim grant against costs which have actually been incurred and defrayed within that project period in question. It's therefore very important that you're always careful with your cash flow and your cost management. And projects over 6 months will also be subject to quarterly monitoring by an appointed monitoring officer. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I think if we have time, myself and Melissa will happily answer any questions that you have.
Hi, Xavier Gollet from Gold Standard Phantoms again. Just two questions. The first one would be the state aid rules are normally about actually having multiple grants or for the same project. If we had grants prior to this one, will that also modify the amount of grants that we'll be getting this time around?
Not in that sense. As long as the project this time around is different to what you've had grant for previously, then that's absolutely fine.
Okay. And then the second, which I might have missed, but what's the maximum length of this project for this grant?
Duration is up to 24 months.
Up to 24 months. Thank you.
Hi, Rupert from Premier Corporate Finance. Could you just reiterate what you were talking about, the percentages? You mentioned that when you put in that you're industrial and you're an SME, you should get 50%, but then you said, please make sure you change your percentage?
Yeah, so the Innovation Funding Service is by default set up that I think for industrial research, if you're a small organisation, you are entitled to 70% grant. Obviously, for this competition, it's actually 50%. So it will always manually give you the most it can, essentially. So it would give you 70%. So you just need to watch out for that and obviously reduce the grant accordingly. So you can simply go in and change it from 70 to 50.
Sorry to ask more questions. Melissa, I think in one of your earlier slides, you talked about there were a couple of bullets on eligibility criteria relating to previous projects. Would you mind putting them up again if you can recover that slide? I'm just trying to understand if you've had previous awards, for example, which might not be complete as of time of application, but would be complete well in advance of start date of new funds, if that would render you ineligible, for example.
No, that would be fine. It's just for when we have some serial appliers within who apply for grant funding. It's when you're not demonstrating that you've used the grant funding as you said you would, and you've done the project you said you would, and given the outputs. But that should be fine.
Thank you. Vibhor this side again from Pangea Data. There was a question asked after Cynthia's presentation about what the investors were looking from these applications in terms of the stages in which the companies were. So from our past experience of completing Innovate UK competitions, we apply for grants for particular projects per se. But this time round, since investors will be looking to invest in businesses, should we complete the application form with an eye on the greater business opportunity and what we're doing as a business, or should we crystallize that in the form of a specific project opportunity? And then a follow-on question is, in terms of what the investors are looking for from these investments, would they be looking for terms to invest in the business per se and take equity in the business? I think that was answered before. Or would this be just an opportunity on a project-by-project basis? If you could just expand on that, please.
Go for it. Great question. And the fantastic thing is that we'll have a panel in literally about 10 minutes who will be able to answer that completely. I'm just very keen to invite up Matthew Crowe from Momentum Biosciences. I'm delighted that Matthew could join us because he's somebody who's, or rather their company has gone through that process, and he'll be able to give you first-hand experience of what it was like. And then we'll have the panel, and Matthew will be able to join that as well to answer further questions. So thank you. Thanks.
Hello. Yes, I'm here representing Momentum Bioscience. I'm head of R&D in Momentum, so forgive me if my experience of the Investment Accelerator is more from a technical or from a project management perspective. But I thought I'd like to share with you our experience of that. So our company is a small to medium-sized enterprise. We have 13 people based at 2 sites, one just outside Oxford and one near Cardiff. We are funded by venture capital investment and also partly by grant funding. We've had grant funding from Smart Awards through the Biomedical Catalyst and obviously through the Investment Accelerator most recently. We are developing an in vitro diagnostic test for the detection or for the rule out of bloodstream infections. Now, this is going to help clinicians to prescribe or withhold antimicrobial therapy as necessary, assisting in the assisting in antimicrobial stewardship. We've got several projects running, but this one is the Investment Accelerator was one that will hopefully bring our test much, much closer to the patient and perhaps have this disruptive impact on a blood culture market that we would expect it to. So our experience of the Investment Accelerator is that we applied for close to the maximum amount of funding for the pilot, which was around £150,000 with, and it was 70% funded at the time. The application process was pretty smooth. It was quite fast. It sounds like ours was a bit faster than this one. Perhaps that's because it's a larger amount of funding, but it took us approximately 7 months to go from drafting the application through to starting the project at the start of this year. That included about 1 month of, so after we submitted the application, about 1 month to get to the sift through to the second stage, and then about 2 to 3 months to find and agree terms with the investors. We then started in January this year. When we applied, we didn't use the IFS system, so it looks like that's going to be a change that you'll come across when you apply for these particular projects. That said, it looks a lot more user friendly than the original spreadsheets that we had from Innovate. And I have to say, because we applied for a few Innovate grants in the past, this had helped us because we were familiar with a lot of the documentation, including the financial spreadsheet. But it seems like that web system seems to break that down a lot more, and looks a lot more user friendly. So that should be a big improvement, I think. As I said, the process I think was simple and proportionate to the amount of funding involved. The monitoring itself, again, we've been through a few of these grant processes, so we were used to having this cycle of quarterly meetings with monitoring officers. The Investment Accelerator involved an initial 1 hour opening meeting with our monitoring officer, and then one every quarter from then on in. And these were usually take about an hour or so. There was a lot of documentation, sort of project update forms that we completed beforehand. Again, you get into the cycle of completing this documentation, submitting them to the monitoring officer, and the monitoring officer meeting is fairly straightforward. Following on from that, you would submit your grant claim through Connect, which is the online portal where you can claim your money through from Innovate, and again that goes through a process of going through a monitoring officer, and then eventually you'll get your claim paid within a couple of weeks of submitting. We actually, so even though this was a short 9-month project, it's a proof of principle project. So from a technical perspective, whilst the objectives were fairly clear, we knew what we wanted to do, the route of actually getting there can be a little unpredictable. I'm sure if you've been involved in early stage technical projects, this can happen. So the project that we planned at the start, which was several months before we started, developed a little whilst we were in that project. So we actually had to make some changes to the project. Now, day-to-day changes in the technical strategy, etc., are not a big deal. But in some cases, you need to move money between the different categories, between the different funding categories. And for that, we had to submit what they called a project change request. And again, this was a really simple process. The monitoring officer supported us through that, and we were able to make those changes, and we moved an amount of money from our materials through into our labour category. So that helped us out, and it reflects, it is possible to change the project. You don't have to keep going at the project if you deem it necessary to change. And we've done that in a number of our projects, and it has been a very easy process to do. Okay, so we haven't yet, in this project, we haven't yet come to completing our final report. But having completed reports in other projects, the final report was a lot less onerous than expected. In fact, it contained a lot less detail than I was expecting from a technical perspective, because being used to writing detailed technical reports, I was expecting to have to generate a lot of this for the benefit of Innovate, and it wasn't like that. It was a lot more simple and very much focused on exploitation, commercial exploitation, and also the progress of the project against the plan. So it was a lot less complicated than we were expecting, which was good. In terms of its impact for us, the Investment Accelerator has given us 100% new money. So this was money that wasn't ring-fenced for other particular purposes. It's also allowed us to opportunistically add a relatively high-risk project, a new project, to our work. and it wouldn't previously have been funded within the money that we'd already got through our investors. So it does enable you to make new discoveries and then react quite quickly with the benefit of having government funding to support it, which has been really good. I think that's the key benefit for us. We didn't actually find any new investors through the accelerator because we knew one of our investors very well, and they encouraged us to apply through the Investment Accelerator, and they were part of a consortium that then that made the investment contribution into the project. That said, I think it would be a very good way of finding new contacts, getting new investors to get involved in your company and into your projects. And it gives them the opportunity to increase their equity, if you already know them, to increase their equity in the company, to activate those new sort of potentially groundbreaking projects and access government funding, which is great. Because it's partly non-diluting funding, so it's great value for money for those investors as well. So overall, I think we've had a very positive experience with the Investment Accelerator, and as it's allowed us to access funds to fund very new proof of principle work. We're on target to finish in September, and hopefully if the data is looking promising, that will lead us then into developing those products further, coming up with something which is perhaps a disruptive technology that will really impact the blood culture market. So as a scheme, I think the Investment Accelerator has had a major beneficial outcome for our business. So if you've got any questions for me, I'll sit at the panel and take them then. Yeah, it's okay?
Yeah,
All right.
that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthew. As Matthew said, and hopefully you picked up on the analysis we did on the pilot Investment Accelerator, 50% of companies were new deal flow for the investors. So certainly you can meet the relevant partners that you're looking for. I'd now like to invite our investors up, as well as Matthew and Neil, up to the panel to have a discussion.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Cynthia. So could I invite up Rebecca Todd from Longwall, Elisa Petris from Syncona, Claire Brown from BioCity. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves. Gareth King and Vijay Barathan from Catapult Ventures. And can I ask back Matthew Crow from Momentum Bioscience? You might need to share the microphones. Or, yes, in fact, if we have the handheld as well, that could be useful. I'll stay at the lectern, so. So I'll ask you to introduce yourselves in a moment, but I'll just describe briefly how you came to be partners on the programme. So we had a process that Cynthia covered on a slide very early on, where we asked for investors to apply to be part of the programme. And that's because we want certain types of investor to partner with us. So specifically, we were looking for investors that can and do invest in early stage companies, investors who between them can offer good UK geographic coverage, because Innovate UK is about all of the UK, can and do invest in high risk innovative companies and products, are prepared to deploy capital with a long-term view and will commit to help companies grow, will add value to investees beyond finance, so it's not just about the capital, it's about leadership, market access, skills, resources, etc., how to structure your share capital, etc., and have a large enough fund currently that they can commit capital to the programme. And I think just a session or two back earlier, there was a question at the back from somebody that Cynthia said I would answer on this panel. It was about whether the application should be a focus on the company or the project. Who was it who asked that question at the back? I couldn't quite see, but someone in the back there, you asked the question. So really, I just want to reiterate the process, which is that we're not doing anything really that's different to normal, other than we've got investors as part of the program already, so that you don't need to be offered a grant and then told to go away, find your match funding in 2 months, and you can have that grant, where you might approach some of these investors anyway to give you that match funding. They are now part of the program. And that question about whether you should focus on the company or the project, it's the standard application form for us, so you should still focus on your project and your technology. I like to think even in the standard application you describe why your company is exciting as well. But really, that's in a nutshell part of this program, is that Innovate UK can find exciting projects and exciting technologies through our processes. We don't really focus on the companies. We do make sure you can deliver it and you have appropriate access to market and things. But really, it's the investors who are looking for exciting companies as well as exciting technologies. So you need to convince us in the standard way through your application form that you have an exciting, innovative technology, service, product. But you need to convince the investors that you have an exciting company that's worth investing in. And really, we're de-risking for each other. Innovate UK is doing technical due diligence in our standard way, finding exciting technologies. We have very broad access across the UK. But equally, the investors are de-risking our grant. They're de-risking the taxpayers' grant as well, because they are finding companies that are structured in such a way that they can grow and scale, that have an appetite to grow and scale. They can help those companies access markets, access supply chains, structure their companies appropriately, etc. So that's my piece. And now perhaps if we just go across the panel, if you can just introduce yourselves, and then I'll open it up to some questions.
Do you want us to introduce the funds, or?
Yes, if you'd like to say a quick bit about the fund, that would be useful, I think.
Yes, I'm Gareth King. I'm with Catapult Ventures, along with VJ. And we're investing from the Greater Manchester and Cheshire Life Sciences Fund. So that's a £31 million fund. We're in year 3 of that fund. We've invested in 25 companies to date, so we're a very active life science investor. Key for us when we're looking at companies, I mean, any company in precision medicine we would be interested in investing in, but a key requirement for our fund is that there needs to be a material presence in the Greater Manchester and Cheshire region of the UK. So I think that's likely to be something that we'll look at pretty quick, or very quickly, when we review applications. So because we can only progress those companies. Really, but if you're in precision medicines, that's an absolute key area for us. It is a very broad scope. I've been looking at the portfolio of companies we've invested in, and it includes companies in digital health, in diagnostics, in certain aspects of med tech. I know some of our companies are going to be interested in applying for this, but the real reason for us getting involved is looking at new deal flow, looking at new companies. So I'm going to be really interested in seeing companies from this. In terms of my background, I'm a life science partner. I'm an investment partner on this fund. My background is more from molecular genetics, science, then went into business side, became CEO of a biotech, and crossed into investment a couple of years ago.
Sorry, could you say the name of your fund again?
Yeah, the investor is Catapult Ventures, and the fund is the Greater Manchester and Cheshire Life Sciences Fund.
Thanks, Gareth. I'm Vijay Bharathan, another life science partner working with Gareth, investing out of the GMC fund. Complementary background to Gareth. I'm a medic by training, worked in the NHS for a while, then went into healthcare investment banking, and then joined the investment side. And I think one of the reasons why we're excited to work on this with Innovate UK is also for deal flow. We do invest in companies with a material presence in the Greater Manchester and Cheshire region, but we do see companies from all over the country, in fact overseas as well. We've got a pretty active pipeline, and we've got capital to deploy, although we've already done 25 investments, and our fund is a 15-year fund, so we already are patient capital.
My name's Rebecca Todd. I'm from Longwall Ventures, which is the fund that was the partner of Momentum earlier, so but not me as it happens. But we have a 75 million enterprise capital fund that closed last autumn in about November, so we're in the very early stages. It's also what we call it 10 plus 5 year fund, which adds up to 50. So we do very early stage investing. Precision medicine, we're a generalist fund. There are 4 partners, one of whom is the finance director, and there are 4 of us that do investments. And we all have slightly different interest areas, but 2 of us focus on the healthcare space, and I'm a geneticist originally, although it's in such a dim, distant past, I struggle with the technology these days. But it means that I've been waiting for the promise of precision medicine for quite a long time as well. So finally, maybe we're starting to see it emerge. So these are areas that both Matthew, Frone, and I are very interested in. So we'd be looking forward to reviewing applications. I would just say to everybody to do a bit of research into, if you're going to pick a fund, do a bit of research into which funds you pick, because we are, our job is to deploy capital in a very sort of defined way. So we all have different amounts we want to invest in different companies over different periods of time and different things you want to achieve with those investments. So that will be a big part of finding the fit as a long-term investor. So, it is worth getting your head around how that works if you're going to be raising venture money, if this is your first time or you're going to be doing it in the future.
Hi, my name is Claire Brown. I represent BioCity. In contrast to some of my peers here, we are a slightly different type of investor in that BioCity have life science parks across the UK. And what we do is provide all of the capability that we think in the right ecosystem for a life science company to flourish. So we obviously have science parks, so you can have your facilities and labs that you need. And then we do a lot of business support that can help a new company identify their value proposition and try and support that with workshops and various types of business support to help them. And then we also do seed investment at the other end, which is where I sit. So we're a broad investor, but always in healthcare. So we will invest in service-based businesses as well as businesses developing a technology. So our maximum investment is £500,000 into a company. So we will have to syndicate with colleagues. We invest off the balance sheet from our revenues that we get from tenants on our sites, as well as we manage an investment fund, the Audley Park Venture Fund, that we develop in conjunction with AstraZeneca. So my background is from AstraZeneca, but I've spent a long time in drug discovery, research and in industry. And so for a seed fund, we actually have quite a heavy exposure in the therapeutic space, which is rather unusual. But we are trying to provide some much needed balance in the portfolio by starting to look at some other opportunities in medtech, digital and medical devices. So I just think it's important to have a spectrum of investors. I think one of the questions earlier was around syndication. Clearly, I think one of the important things on these growth showcase events is the exposure. Whether you ultimately get picked up by any of the investors and it fits the particular project that they want to invest in is a bonus. But regardless, I think it puts you under the nose of people that may be able to refer you on to other companies or other investors that are looking for your technology. So I never think, as long as it's within scope, I think it's always worthwhile putting an application in.
Elisa Petrus, I'm a partner at Syncona. So Syncona was set up about 6 years ago by the Wellcome Trust, and we're now listed on the London Stock Exchange, and we have about £550 million of capital to deploy. Really, our strategy is to partner with leading academic founders and to set up companies that can independently take products all the way to market, and we look to support them throughout that whole life cycle, so from inception all the way to product approval, and we look to remain substantial investors all the way through that. And we really do that by working hand in hand with initially the founders to work, to build the business plan for the company, and then with the management team as we bring those people in. We have invested very heavily in the cell and gene therapy space and also in advanced diagnostics. One of our companies is now profitable, and so we were sole funders all the way through to that point. Other companies were started off at a much earlier stage, so we can go in very, very early as well. A lot of the people on our team bring a lot of operational experience, so we tend to work very closely with the management teams of our companies. In terms of ticket sizes, we go from anywhere from $500,000, and we've put up to more than in excess of 100 million in one of our companies, so we have that flexibility given the deep pockets we have, and we're very excited about participating in this competition. I think that for us, this is really an opportunity to look at potential exciting opportunities that are still quite early and small, but that have the potential to become something much bigger and that we could invest in a Series A type funding. We also tend to initially invest alone. We don't tend to syndicate at the beginning. We like to have substantial control over how setting the strategy for the company and building the business plan. But then as the company grows, we're willing to bring in like-minded investors, people with a very long-term view. So we have essentially what is an evergreen fund. We want to be there at the end. So that's our model. My background, originally a molecular biologist, and then spent time in strategy consulting and in banking before joining Syncona.
Thank you. And I'm Matthew Crowe, Head of R&D at Momentum Bioscience. Again.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I'm not an investor. I spend the money.
Thank you. I think, Rebecca, you mentioned the importance of doing the research on investors. You can, within our process, choose one investor or choose to have your application sent to all investors. On our webpage, in the brief online, you'll see there's a link to the webpage of all the investors. There's an email address so you can contact the investors, and there's a PDF document with a summary that was given to us from each of the investors on their funds. So do your research, look at that. And I suggest if you're really expecting one of the investors to invest with you, try and get to heads of terms, that you contact them and don't just rely on the application form being sent to them and then them finding you, if you like. So I will now open it to questions. Yep.
George Frangu, Massive Analytic. Can you explain the difference between investing in a company and investing in a project? And what would the criteria be? So one of the challenges that a scale-up company like Massive Analytic has is we have a cap table with existing investors. Most of those are angels or founders, but it's driven really by, a basic level, new articles and shareholder agreements, which makes life very complicated. So I suppose the question I'm asking is, if you were to say, look at a company like us, and actually, to be honest with you, I know quite a few of the listed investors, what would the focus be? Would it be, we're going to fund this project, or are we going to fund this company? Because they're very different.
Yeah. So, should I answer that?
Sure.
At least
Elisa,
from the Syncona perspective. So we would be looking to fund at the company level in terms of, we'd be looking to put in probably a convertible loan at the company level. So we wouldn't just be looking at the project level.
Okay, so it might be true for other companies as well, but Massive Analytic is in a number of industries. Medicine and healthcare, particularly precision medicine, is a very strong focus for us, but we are also in other industries. So we're in security and defence, we're in connected transport and smart cities and one or two others. Would that preclude, say, a VC that focuses on healthcare investing in our company? Because we are actually got a pretty grand vision, really, in terms of where we're going with our technology.
That would probably, it will depend. I mean, we're quite a generalist investor in that there are different partners who have different areas of interest, and that's how we sort of work. We're not restricted in our focus for the fund, but different. It depends what they've raised the money saying they will do, which is what I said about doing the research into the investing. You know, each fund has gone out and raised money from investors behind them, and based on an investment pitch as to how they're going to invest that money. So, you know, if they've said they're only going to invest in healthcare, then it's a question for them as to whether how much they feel they're restricted by that, by looking at a proposition like yours. But at the end of the day, I suspect all of us as investors are buying shares in companies. So, you know, there will be a core project that we're participating in funding in the idea that that's going to build value in the company. But at the end of the day, we're buying shares in companies, and it's that long-term value growth of the company that we're going to be making an investment case to our partners, to our investment committees about. So, you know, I don't imagine there are any on that list that are just going to look at a project and separate it off. We're going to be looking at how we're going to, you know, what's going to happen to that cap table when we buy shares in your company. But some funds will be able to look more broadly at an underlying technology with different market applications, and that would be a conversation that you'd have to have with them.
So this is primarily a company investment with all that comes with it, perhaps board positions, a change of a shareholder agreement, all those sorts of things. So effectively, when we come to you, it's more like a company investment and treat you as an investor in the company and its vision rather than just this particular project.
Yeah, and I think that's how it works with the match funding outside of this competition.
Yeah,
isn't it?
no, absolutely. And something that's linked to that actually, so just say your project was 500,000, the minimum amount for this competition, and that's 250 grant, 250 investment, say. Investors can actually invest more than 250 if that's what you both want, but 250 needs to be ring-fenced for the project. Yeah, and that happened in the pilot competition as well, in a number of cases actually, where got to heads of terms, which again we're not privy to, we don't want to be. But yeah, an investor can put in more money, or you can spin things out and create new companies or whatever as well. So I think there was a question here, sorry. I think it might have been the second hand that went up just a minute. Oh, sorry, the microphone's in the hand, but I'll come to you next. Yeah.
Mira Wyman, Heart Cell Foundation. I'm not quite sure I understand the limitation of picking one VC rather than going in for the whole lot, because if we're going into phase 3, clearly we'd be looking for Syncona to take us all the way through, whereas there is a limitation with the others. But if one puts down Syncona and they don't choose you, that means you're out of the whole process?
Yes, you can choose one or you can choose all. That's correct. You can choose one. One reason for that is that you may be in a investor's current portfolio, and you may not want your application to be sent to all. In the pilot, interestingly, we did have a phase where if you were unsuccessful with your preferred investor, it went to the remaining investors. That added about 3 months to the process. So this time we've combined them both. So yes, you need to.
That becomes almost a no-brainer. Then you would go for all of them and not take the risk.
Well, depending on your circumstances, yes. Yes, it could be. Yeah, there were 2 on this side. Is that okay? Okay, sorry, we'll take one more on this side. We've got plenty of time, don't worry. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I will just reiterate the question I asked earlier, which was about the risk with this particular grant. The Innovate UK side says we're here to de-risk, this is what the money is for your project. But at the same time, understand that, of course, you yourselves as investors would be looking for something that's more commercially viable, that's moving closer to commercialization rather than something of risk. So my earlier question was, since we have to put in an application to, of course, both of you, Innovate UK and the investors, where is that risk sweet spot, at least from your side?
Vijay or Rebecca or Vijay? Yeah.
I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. We're by nature early-stage investors, so our risk threshold is pretty low. We look at a lot of things that are very early. We even do seed investments of a minimum of 50K for ideas that need to be proven. So we have a range of products, and we are firmly at the early stage, high-risk end of scale. But it's going to be an individual case as we look at your opportunity.
you're asking us to quantify an art rather than a science. I mean, that's what it's all about. As in, you know, we all have slightly different strategies and slightly different risk appetites, and even that comes down to a personal basis. Let's be fair as to the things that we're each involved in. But yeah, we are very, very early stage as well. We'll quantify projects. The easier thing probably to grasp is to look at how much a particular fund is likely to want to invest in a company, what sort of return thresholds they're looking at getting, the time frame they're looking at. Those things are actually, in effect, sort of indicators of risk, but those are things that will define whether you fall within a remit in a much easier way to grasp. You know, how you quantify risk is a difficult proposition. But we're all going to be looking for the basis of a company that will become commercially viable with good commercial prospects, providing a good return on investment. So, you know, that the more you can do to indicate those sort of qualities, the more you are de-risking it effectively.
In other words, where I was getting to is I'm getting this feeling, and maybe it's taken me some time to get there, that it's almost like two entirely different applications here. One is for Innovate UK, effectively, this is the science, this is the project, this is what the government will be de-risking, while you are looking at how viable is this venture at all. So that's a different way of thinking, and that's what I wanted to understand. Is it the approach that we take in the wording for Innovate UK is the approach that you would like to see, or are we doing something else with you? And that's, I think, what we're...
I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because at the end of the day, you know, Innovate UK are obviously, in order to have more money in the public purse, they need to be investing in things that will ultimately have a commercial viability at some capacity. So I think, you know, part of the reason these events, these pilots and things were set in place was so that maybe Innovate UK could understand what in the long term is going to be more commercially viable, is going to contribute to UK PLC and make the UK economy do much better. So in order to do that, we have to have companies that have been invested in, that do have the legs to go further. There are multiple other calls available for basic science that maybe what you're talking to around the bigger picture of making sure that science progresses. But I don't think that's necessarily part of this call.
I wouldn't worry too much about that, because you're going to have to include that information as part of it. And to be fair, I think when we go through, we're going to see what comes through the Innovate Sift, and then we're going to look at them. And then, you know, if they seem like the sort of thing that fits, then there'll be an information exchange process. So, you know, I wouldn't, you know, the quantity of information you provide isn't going to define whether you're something we're going to want to know more about. The more pithy and focused and you make it, the easier it will be for us to decide this is something that's worth finding out more about. And then there will be, in the process, will be our investment process. So, you know, I wouldn't get too hung up on that, I would say.
Yeah, can I just, it might be worth just talking about, we just talked about the Innovate UK process here. We haven't talked about the investors process. And there's going to be a parallel process running here. We're not going to make our decision based solely on this. Well, we might make a negative decision made solely on this Innovate UK application that gets sent in. But a positive decision is going to have to go through our normal investment process. So all of us will have an investment committee. We are investing in companies here, so we have to understand what your business plan is. We're going to want, very likely, a first thing that we're going to be asking for is a pitch deck on the company after we select companies that we want more information about. Certainly I am anyway. I really can't talk for everybody, but I suspect it's very similar. You know, first thing we're going to want is a pitch deck on the company. We're going to want to quickly review that. Then we're likely to call you in to meet and to give that pitch in person. It's likely to be a kind of, in our case, kind of 90-minute. Give the pitch. A few of the key members of the team are going to be there. See if we like you. Then we'll move into a much more detailed process of following up, due diligence, understanding, you know, specifically about your technology, competitive position, market, etc. Then we'll run through our normal process. That will go to an investment committee where we have to make the case. At least in our case, we go to an investment committee initially before we go to heads of terms. And then that's how we get to the heads of terms, which is what a lot of the Innovate UK process is linked off as well. But there is going to be a separate process going on here, and I would be prepared with a pitch deck. As well as doing your your Innovate UK application, have a pitch deck ready, because that's what we're going to want, I think, probably all of us. Yeah.
So why would we bother applying for Innovate UK?
to get a bit more money.
Why not just come straight to you?
Because it's free money.
Yeah.
Well, it's not, because it's a lot of work.
All right.
It's a lot of work and it's a lot of risk. And the amount of the funding rate is, only 60% of your ones that reach the threshold didn't get a partner. So wouldn't it be quicker just to come straight to you?
Well, don't forget we're de-risking for each other. We're de-risking for, you asked about the appetite for risk. We specifically looked for investors who do have an appetite for high-risk, innovative companies and products. But we are de-risking mutually. So we are providing 50% of the funding for something that may not be at the stage where an investor may usually invest.
That's exactly right. At least from the Syncona perspective, again, it's really tapping into to companies that perhaps wouldn't be quite ready, that we wouldn't feel comfortable putting in the full Series A just yet. And this is a mechanism to kind of de-risk that somewhat before we go.
The other side of the room now, Julia, if you don't mind. Just next, please.
A quick question. Let's say you apply to Innovate UK, you're turned down, and then you apply to the VC to any one of the VC panel. Will they be aware you've been turned down or not?
Yes. So if you're unsuccessful, by turned down you mean unsuccessful in getting a grant. Yeah. Yes, they will be made aware of that. There's nothing to stop the investors carrying on talking to you. So if you're unsuccessful in getting the grant, they can carry on talking to you. Absolutely, and we encourage that. And you could apply for a grant another time.
Yeah, but it has two sides of the coin. You could argue that you have a stigma because you've been declined by Innovate UK, therefore go straight to the panel.
Well, not really, because we're looking for quite different things to Innovate UK.
And a lot of
in particular grants.
UK.
Yeah, I mean that's it. We're all looking for very different things.
Yeah. But I think it's important the other way, isn't it? So if an investor, if we like it, but Innovate UK don't like it, then the investor can fund it, but you won't get the grants from Innovate UK.
Yes, and vice versa. So if we like it, you don't like it, we can't issue the grant. It has to be a yes and a yes.
From the Innovate UK side, but from the investor side, it could be a yes from us, a no from them, but you could still fund it, just not through this call.
Yes, through investment, yeah. Could I just take the gentleman who's had his hand up from the beginning? Thank you.
So I guess a number of my questions were already answered, but one was about the possibility, and I think Syncona mentioned about Series A or something. If we would be going for a relatively larger investment, it is possible to make use of this particular call to have the large amount of investment with only a small part ring-fenced for that particular call.
Yes.
Would in general any of you be ready for that, or because that's a way of sort of de-risking if we're already a trading company?
Well, if I can there's an obvious answer to part of that. The Innovate UK grant is only going to cover certain overheads. Now, a lot of companies that are going to be loss-making, you've got to run the business as well for the 24 months. So, to me, an obvious thing listening to the finance talk from Joe was actually that, that was all project costs. Now, you're going to have to factor in the company costs on top of that, because we're not just financing a project. We need that company to get to a value point, a key milestone, which may actually be different from this project as well. It might take a little bit longer, that needs funding, that we decide that's how we need to fund it to a milestone. So what struck me listening to the finance talk was actually it seemed likely that a lot of people are going to need to raise more on top of this project cost, and then you're talking about the quantum, and I think that's likely to be very different for different investors, because clearly if this is a very small proportion of a Series A round, this is immaterial, really. So I think what we're really talking about here is investments where this is a key part of the investment, rather than just a very small proportion of a much larger investment. It just seems overly complex to go through that process.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
In the front. Yeah, thanks.
Graham Douglas, Moretti Medical. I had a question a bit similar to the implementation, is how the Innovate UK 50% would interact with EIS, or if it does at all. And secondly, for cash flow, because the Innovate grants are paid quarterly in arrears, would investment money typically come in sort of ahead of that?
Unfortunately, I don't think any of us are EIS investors. I know 24 Haymarket is on the list. I don't think they're here.
No.
So
I can't see any reason why it would have any implication, positive or negative.
Yeah, not Innovate UK's money.
We co-invest with EIS investors a lot in syndicates. It's not, I think most of us are used to dealing with it.
Oh, hello.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was a little bit late confirming to Neil that we could be on the panel, but my name is Brajesh Roy from Mercia Technologies, and we are national technology investor in early stage companies, and we do life sciences, lots of other things, and we've got about 250 million available to invest. We took part in the pilot last year, and we did invest from an EIS fund, and there were no concerns there. And one of the earlier questions about, are you wasting your time doing this? My sense is, and the way Mercia perceives this, is that this is for companies that are trying to raise investment. They're trying to make your lives a bit easier by making introductions and some grant finance along the way. We invested in companies where the project was basically the whole of the company and the whole of the startup, and it was a major part of it, 90% of the business. We invested in businesses that applied to the accelerator but didn't get the grant, but we still liked the overall company. And there was the third case of going to the Investment Accelerator enabled some riskier projects that were just part of a business that we weren't willing to fund alone. So I think it kind of covers all of those. And of every single person who was successful, I will say they reached out to us while you were going through the application process, not after they'd made their decision, because you only have a few weeks for us to give an indication of interest. A few weeks isn't that long for all of us, particularly if you need to get to an investment committee to be able to offer a term sheet. So yeah, just a little bit of gate crash.
Yeah, thanks, Brajesh. I didn't see you come in, or I'd have asked you to sit up on the panel here, but thanks for covering some of those questions again. No one's got their hand up, which is a good sign. I think we're slightly overrun, but not too much, and we're going to break for networking, so that will be an opportunity to discuss this more. So could I thank our panellists again, please? So closing remarks, I think some of the things I was going to say to close have all been covered. Get your application form in time. This is only right if you want investment. Make sure you contact an investor before applying. And that's it. So see you in the networking. Thanks.